In this lesson, we're going to focus on selecting infrastructure controls for our enterprise infrastructure. Now, our networks and infrastructure security is created by a large number of different decisions that we have made over the years. Each decision to install a new piece of hardware or software will introduce new vulnerabilities into our enterprise infrastructure, but we can also strategically select different controls to effectively mitigate the risk presented by these new vulnerabilities and weaknesses. As a cybersecurity professional, you're going to spend a lot of time selecting or recommending various controls that you can use to effectively secure and protect your network and the data it contains. Now, a control is a measure or safeguard that's implemented to mitigate potential risks and to protect an organization's assets. Selecting effective controls ensures that we can prevent breaches and to minimize vulnerabilities while ensuring that our resources are being used efficiently. Effective control selections can also help us to foster trust among our stakeholders by demonstrating that we have a proactive approach to our organization's security and compliance postures. So, in this lesson, we're going to go through some key principles, methodologies, and best practices that you can use to make more informed decisions when you're selecting effective controls inside of your organization's network infrastructure. Now, first, let's talk about some key principles. When it comes to selecting effective controls, we should consider the key principles of least privilege, defense in depth, utilizing a risk-based approach, conducting lifecycle management, and focusing on open design principles to secure our infrastructure. Now, the principle of least privilege mandates that a user or system should only have the necessary access rights that they need to perform their duties. Selecting and implementing controls associated with the principle of least privilege really does help to reduce the potential attack surface of your network. Another key principle to use is the concept of defense in depth. Now, the defense in depth approach emphasizes the use of multiple layers of security to ensure that if one control fails, then our other controls will still be ready to stop a potential threat from successfully exploiting our infrastructure. Now, a risk-based approach is another good idea for you to implement because it underscores the need for the prioritization of controls based on the potential risks and vulnerabilities that are specific to your organization's infrastructure. After all, no organization has enough people, time, or money to completely mitigate every single potential threat or vulnerability that's out there, so we have to prioritize them using a risk-based approach to more effectively use our limited resources while giving us the best protection for our infrastructure. Additionally, the principle of lifecycle management will be used to focus on the importance of regularly reviewing, updating, and retiring our controls that align with the always changing threat landscape that we're experiencing. After all, we don't select and implement our controls one time and then expect that our network will be well protected for the rest of time. So we need to conduct proper lifecycle management for all of our controls as our networks evolve over the years. Now, the final key principle we need to utilize is one known as the open design principle. The open design principle is focused on creating transparency and accountability by ensuring that our infrastructure and our controls undergo rigorous testing and scrutiny to ensure they're effective and being implemented securely. By deeply understanding and integrating these key principles into the selection of your infrastructure's controls, you can ensure that you have a more robust, resilient, and responsive enterprise infrastructure. Second, let's take a look at the methodology that you can use to select some effective controls. Now, the basic methodology that I recommend is to assess the current state, conduct a gap analysis, set clear objectives, conduct benchmarking, conduct a cost-benefit analysis, ensure stakeholder involvement, and then implement monitoring and feedback loops into your organization. So remember that when you're examining methodologies, it's always important that you adopt a structured and systematic approach to ensure the security of your infrastructure remains intact. Now, you should always start out by assessing the current state of your security and the controls that you already have in place. You must have a clear understanding of your current infrastructure setup, its vulnerabilities, and its existing controls, if any, before you start adding any kind of new controls. Once you understand your baseline, you should then utilize a gap analysis to identify any discrepancies between your current security posture and your desired security posture that you want to achieve inside of your organization's network. Then, once you have this information, you can set clear objectives for what you're hoping to achieve as you add additional controls. Whether you want to safeguard specific data, ensure uptime, or maintain compliance with laws and regulations, setting up clear objectives is going to help you do this during your control selection process. Once your objectives have been set, you can conduct benchmarking to compare your organization's processes, performance, and security metrics against your industry's best practices to determine how you compare to your competitors and others in your industry. Next, you should consider performing a cost-benefit analysis before you start implementing your new controls. While we want the best controls in place, these controls also need to be cost-effective. So it's important to find the right balance between the level of security that you want to achieve versus the amount of financial and other resources that are going to have to be invested to achieve that level of security. Stakeholder involvement is also important during this process because it's going to help you to ensure the controls you choose are going to be adopted by your users and they're going to work in the business context of your current and ongoing operations. Finally, we need to create monitoring and feedback loops so that we can ensure our controls remain effective over time because the cyber threat landscape is constantly changing and evolving. By regularly revisiting your control selection methodology to ensure it remains relevant and adjusting it as required, we're going to be able to ensure that our enterprise infrastructure remains agile in the face of continually evolving threats. Third, let's consider some best practices to use during the selection of various controls for your enterprise networks. Now, when you're determining the best controls for your enterprise infrastructure, you must first conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to better understand the threats and vulnerabilities that are specific to your organization. This will provide us with the foundation for every subsequent decision that we're going to be asked to make during the control selection process. Also, a risk assessment should not be considered a one-time thing, but instead it should be a recurring process that's going to be repeated and updated anytime there's a significant change in your enterprise infrastructure or your business's operations. Next, you need to align your control selection to a well-established framework or standard. For example, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, known as NIST, and the International Organization for Standardization, known as ISO, both have published guidelines that have been vetted and refined over time. By adhering to these frameworks, you can be assured that your approach is comprehensive and based on tried and tested methodologies. For example, I personally like to use the NIST Cybersecurity Framework and the NIST Risk Management Framework when I'm working as a cybersecurity consultant because they are both very in-depth and well-regarded frameworks that we can rely on during our engagements. Another best practice is to perform customization of the frameworks for your own usage to meet your specific use cases. Here, customization is key because while these frameworks provide a robust starting point, you can also tailor their controls to the unique aspects of your organization's business operations and its infrastructure's own specific risk profile. Finally, I cannot overemphasize the importance of conducting stakeholder engagement and training as part of your effective control selection process. Your security controls are only going to be as effective as the people who are asked to implement them and monitor them. Therefore, you have to engage all relevant stakeholders in the decision-making processes to ensure that they understand the rationale behind each control that was being selected and its role in your organization's broader security strategy. Regular training sessions should also be conducted to keep everyone up to date on the latest threats, the purpose of the security controls we have in place, and the best ways to utilize those control measures. When it comes to implementing effective security controls in your organization, you really will have to rely on a knowledgeable and engaged workforce to achieve a higher level of security for your infrastructure. So remember, a control is a measure or safeguard that's implemented to mitigate potential risks and protect an organization's assets. Selecting effective controls will ensure that we can prevent breaches and minimize vulnerabilities while ensuring our resources are being utilized efficiently. To select your controls, you should use a structured methodology like the basic methodology I presented that includes an assessment of the current state, a gap analysis, clear objectives, benchmarking, a cost-benefit analysis, stakeholder involvement, and monitoring and feedback loops. Also, that control selection is not going to be a one-time event, but instead it's something that we need to practice time and time again, and I recommend that you do this either annually or quarterly based on your business to ensure your enterprise infrastructure remains secure.